Good evening, dear Medyascope viewers. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. Begüm Dönmez Ersöz will be joining us this evening from Washington, D.C. to speak about Turkey-U.S. relations in light of the recent developments between the two countries. But first, let's take a look at our news bulletin titles. On February 14th, a PKK group in the Gara mountain of northern Iraq executed 13 Turkish hostages in the midst of a military operation led by the Turkish state. The Turkish opposition harshly criticized why the government failed to negotiate for the hostages' releases. As this casualty drew global attention, Erdogan accused the United States and the Kurdish politicians in the People's Democratic Party for supporting the PKK.
The Operation Claw Eagle 2, which was aimed to rescue the Turkish soldiers and police officers who have been the hostages of the PKK for more than 5 years, resulted in the deaths of all 13 soldiers. Turkey's Defense Minister Hulusi Akar made the announcement on February 14, saying that 48 PKK militants were neutralized during the operation and 12 of the abducted Turks were shot in the head and 1 in the shoulder. In accordance, Interior Minister Süleyman Soylu and Defense Minister Akar visited CHP leader Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu and Party leader Meral Akşener on February 16 to inform them on the operation at the Turkish Parliament building. On February 15, President Erdogan addressed the Gara operation casualties at a meeting with the Justice and Development Party members in the Rize province of Turkey. In his statement, Erdogan said that the Turkish armed forces wanted to save the Turkish citizens in the operation but failed to do so. During his speech, Erdogan called the mother of one of the martyrs, promising to avenge her son's death. Such actions have been harshly criticized by Party leader Akşener, politicizing a mother's deep grief. Maybe you can livestream the mother of a martyr during a conference and try to politicize a fatality, but we cannot do that. Your job is not to distribute dignity, but is to keep the sons of these mothers alive. CHP leader Kılıçdaroğlu also criticized the government, and specifically President Erdogan, for not taking the necessary steps to rescue the 13 Turkish hostages. In the conference you held in Rize, you said that one of the goals of the operation was to rescue our 13 martyrs, but you failed. Who will own up to the failure of this operation? Who is responsible for this? Kılıçdaroğlu said on February 16 at the CHP parliamentary group meeting. Medyascope editor-in-chief Ruşen Çakır evaluated the strong reactions from the Turkish opposition with the following statement to Medyascope viewers on February 17. The opposition was expected to stand on the AKP government's side under the motives of anti-terrorism and martyrs' memorial, but that was not the case at all. Everyone was surprised by these reactions, including myself. Not that our reactions are so important. Probably the most surprised people were Erdogan and Bahçeli. You press a button, and the opposition forgets about all of their criticisms and start to talk the same language with you. And you continue as if nothing has happened. Then, you blame the opposition leaders for being terrorists at different times. Erdogan uses this as a button he can arbitrarily turn on and off under the guise of fight against terrorism. And he has been assuming that the opposition will abide to the heroic narrative he follows through terrorism. This game has ended as of yesterday and today. During Erdogan's speech in Rize, he also slammed the US for supporting the PKK over the statement that the US State Department made on the incident. According to the Turkish Foreign Ministry, the wording of the statement with an if clause was offensive for the Turkish government. The statement read that, if reports of the death of Turkish civilians at the hands of the PKK, a designated terrorist organization, are confirmed, we condemn this action in the strongest possible terms. The Kurdish majority opposition People's Democratic Party has been accused of having ties with the PKK for a long time. The Gara operation further ignited this perception. On February 15, HDP announced that more than 700 people were detained overnight, including party officials, following the deaths of the 13 Turkish citizens in northern Iraq.
Begüm Dönmez Ersöz from the Voice of America is joining us this evening from Washington, D.C.
Hello, Ms. Dönmez Ersöz. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so the long-awaited meeting between Antony Blinken and Mevlut Çavuşoğlu finally took place at the beginning of this week. It had been postponed previously, and before that, the only official contact between the countries had been a phone conversation between the National Security Advisor to Biden and the presidential spokesperson, Ibrahim Kalın. So comparing with the contacts the new Biden administration has made with the other countries, what can you tell us about this delay of direct meetings between the officials? Is it done on purpose, or is Turkey simply not a priority?
So no one would probably want to put words into the mouths of the Biden administration officials, but most experts that I have spoken to say maybe a little bit of both. But it's important to note that a senior official from the Biden administration recently spoke to Washington Post, and the official played down the matter of President Biden not yet having spoken with President Erdogan. So officials are kind of, noting that the President Biden has not been in office even for a month now, and has been primarily focused on domestic issues such as the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as, how to put the economy back on track. So the Biden administration appears to be aware that there has been some sort of a frustration or displeasure on Turkey's side about not having received a call yet from the president. But they also say that there have been some other contacts with the officials that you have just mentioned, and also they say there are a lot of NATO allies and other foreign leaders that the president has not called yet either. So it's also important to note that former President Donald Trump had called the Israeli Prime Minister just 2 days after he took office, but it also took President Biden to call his Israeli counterpart 28 days. Mm-hmm. So, and secondly, it appears that President Biden has been delegating some of the foreign policy work to his team members. And Antony Blinken spoke to Çavuşoğlu, and the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan spoke to Ibrahim Kalin. So there have been talks and contacts between the two sides during the Biden administration, but not at the presidential level yet.
Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about the statements that have been released, because prior to the official contacts, there have been several statements that have been released by a certain U.S. institution in regards to Turkey, and we'll come to that. But before that, as you mentioned, finally the Blinken and Çavuşoğlu meeting did occur. So how do you evaluate this meeting? I mean, there are several points that have been underlined, and some have also noted that it was done on the same day as the meeting with the Greek foreign minister as well. So is this significant? What does it tell us?
Mm-hmm. So according to the readout provided by the Department of State, Secretary Blinken's affirming the U.S. view that PKK terrorists bear responsibility for the deaths of 13 Turks in northern Iraq seems to have averted the situation from escalating, because Turkey had reacted very badly to the very initial statement coming from the State Department that said, if it is confirmed. So the most recent statement from the State Department regarding this phone call between the two foreign ministers may also suggest that there are, signals that indicate the United States is willing to work with Turkey. But also the fact that President Erdogan was very quick to pick up on the very initial statement, the previous statement, and lash out at the United States leaders is also perceived as an indication that it will not be very easy to navigate through this difficult relationship. So the view that the United States is willing to work with Turkey on a number of areas has been expressed by an official from the Biden administration as well. The official saying that the message in those calls to Turkey is actually multifaceted. There are a number of areas where the United States wants to cooperate with Turkey. It's a NATO ally, it's a strategic partner, and has a critical role to play, including in, Syria and Libya. Also, having said that, it's also worth noting that Secretary Blinken spoke to his Greek counterpart on the same day, Dendias. So we're talking about almost back-to-back phone calls with those countries, and the tone and content of the readouts with regard to those phone calls appear to reflect the separate set of problems with regard to U.S. relationship with those two NATO allies, I mean, Greece and Turkey. And there has been some, talk of Greece replacing Turkey within the alliance, and it was, obvious from the readout with regard to the phone call with Greece that the increasing cooperation with Greece in defense, in security, and energy area. So it was obvious from the readout, but also some of the experts that I have spoken to about this, Greece-Turkey rivalry within the alliance have also underlined the fact that, Greece is not replacing Turkey within the alliance, but the United States might be trying to hedge its bets. So this is what most of the experts say and analyze the situation.
Mm-hmm. So we mentioned that the direct contacts have been late and not very frequent, but there have been several statements that have been issued by various official institutions relating to the developments in Turkey since Biden took office. So this, it's been a very intense period in Turkey, I guess. These statements include the Boğaziçi protests and the voiced concern over the detention of students and the condemnation of the anti-LGBTQI rhetoric. This was followed by the US State Department's call for the immediate release of Osman Kavala. Then there's the letter the senators wrote to Biden to ask him to pressure Turkey and so forth. So there's, and we can say that with these statements, there's this emphasis on human rights issues, which have plagued Turkey for a very long time now. And this is also a very big shift, a major shift from the Trump era, where there wasn't any kind of, demands with regards to these things. And Turkey sees these messages as, in terms of meddling in its interior affairs and so forth. So how will this impact the relations between the two countries in the long run? I mean, there are values to be upheld on the one hand, which, the Biden administration seems to be underlining. And then there's the pragmatic relations with Turkey to continue on the other.
Mm-hmm. So more criticism on human rights was already in the cards for Turkey when Biden administration took over. And as you said, one of the very first statements coming from the State Department regarding Turkey was the call on Turkey to release Osman Kavala. And then the State Department spokesperson, Ned Price, publicly criticized Turkey regarding the Boğaziçi University protests. And he did that before even, taking questions from the members of the press during that briefing. It was, I think, 1.5 minutes into the press briefing that he himself raised the issue at the top of the press briefing. So on top of that, a bipartisan group of 54 senators, as you were saying, wrote to Biden emphasizing, urging him to kind of emphasize to President Erdogan the importance of reversing his quote-unquote authoritarian course. The letter was problematic from Turkey's perspective in the sense that it described Enes Kanter as a human rights advocate. This was problematic from Turkey's perspective, but so a lot of experts say that Turkey will hear more from the United States on human rights, fundamental freedoms, as well as the freedom of the press, maybe. But this might not mean that this will dominate the entire relationship. The previous administration was unwilling to talk about those issues, as they saw the relationship with Turkey as more of a transactional one, as most analysts put it. And another thing to point out is maybe, the 6th of January Capitol siege in the United States, even though Secretary Antony Blinken acknowledges that, what happened on the 6th of January presented some challenges for the United States to wave the banner of democracy and human rights. He also underscores the fact that American democracy is, resilient. Even if they are grappling with problems, they are doing it in a transparent way and for, out there for the entire world to see, and they're not trying to sweep it under the rug. So a lot of people say that the Biden administration will not hold back criticism on human rights issues just because of what happened on the 6th of January. So on the contrary, the democracy message may have actually become much more important for the Biden administration, more than ever. But as I said, this doesn't necessarily mean that this will dominate the entire relationship, because there are areas that the United States wants to work with Turkey. But at the same time, it means that it will speak to its allies on human rights issues more openly, because the new administration also sees this human rights issue as, one of the core principles of its foreign policy. They see the NATO and the Western alliances as an alliance of shared democratic values, as well as, the shared defense and security interests. And we have already seen this new approach with Saudi Arabia as well. The White House spokesperson recently said they are going to recalibrate the relationship with Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia has recently released the human rights activist, the woman activist, which was welcomed by the United States. So the Biden administration is apparently expected to speak more about human rights issues, as was the case with previous democratic administrations in the US.
Well, the other key issues which is dominating the talks and the relation is obviously the key problem of the S-400. So the US, I guess, is adamant on its position, and there's no really bargaining on the matter. But in recent weeks, Turkey has been trying to propose solutions such as this Crete model and so forth. So first of all, is this a way out for Turkey's troubles on the matter? And then secondly, I mean, yesterday there was the news, it was reported in the news that Turkey had hired a US lobbying firm in an attempt to remain in the F-35 jet fighter program. So what does this mean for the S-400s and the relationship ahead?
So in terms of the Crete model recently suggested by Turkey's side, most experts in the United States say the Crete model could be a starting point for negotiations, but not enough to resolve the issue. So to my understanding, there are three aspects to it. So one, the Crete model, regarding the S-300s back in 1990s, the S-300s and S-400 systems are different in terms of their military technology. Military experts say the S-4, okay, they come from the same defense equipment family, but the S-400 is the most upgraded version of S-300. So the second point is that the Russia the Russia of the 1990s and the Russia that we see today are completely different from each other. Today, experts say we see a Russia that made a very strong comeback after the war in Georgia in 2008, and then Russia that was able to annex Crimea in 2014, and then Russia that kind of was able to change the rules of the game in Syria. So, and the experts say the political dynamics surrounding the relations between Russia and NATO and Russia and the United States are completely different from each other. So, and apart from that, there is, the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, which was adopted by US Congress. And this law lays out how sanctions could be lifted. It says, the country should not, Turkey should not possess those systems, and the president should be able to certify that. So even though some wording could be interpreted differently, it does not change the fact that the National Defense Authorization Act actually binds the hands of the administration in terms of sanctions. So in order for sanctions to be lifted, or in order for Turkey not to be targeted with new sanctions, the S-400s need to go. This is what we have been hearing from the State Department. They say Turkey should not retain the S-400. That's the wording they use. And experts also say, the negotiations for the second regiment of the S-400s also needs to stop. So most analysts that I have spoken to say, the S-400 deal with the Russians was a very, political agreement from the very beginning. So Ankara has to make another political agreement now. So in terms of the reports that Turkey hired a lobbying firm in order to join the F-35 Joint Strike program, most people, have already underlined, that the S-400 deal with the Russians is kind of, perceived as one of the most expensive arms deal in history because, the cost of the entire system is $2.5 billion. And on top of that, Turkey has been the first NATO ally who has been targeted with CAATSA sanctions. This is important. And, on top of that, Turkey was expelled from the F-35 program, which kind of, meant that it has lost some of the, opportunities coming with the F-35 program. And on top of that, if the reports are true, then we're hearing that Turkey has hired a lobbying firm and it will pay that lobbying firm $750,000. So, of course, the impact of this lobbying effort remains to be seen, but also we need to kind of note that the S-400 and this, relations with Russia issue is a bipartisan issue in the United States. I mean, a lot of people say, that there is no, there's not one Congress member who would sympathize or who would stand by, Turkey in its S-400 decision. So it's a very difficult issue, in the eyes of the Congress. This is a bipartisan issue. So it remains to be seen, how much of an impact this would have on the Congress view regarding the S-400 purchase from the Russians.
Mm-hmm. Begüm, Dönmez, Ersöz, thank you so much for having joined us this evening.
My pleasure.
And now for the coronavirus-related developments of the week. According to the data released by the Ministry of Health, 7,241 new coronavirus cases were reported for February 18, making the case tally pass 2.61 million, while the nationwide death toll reached 27,821, with 83 fatalities over the past day. President Erdogan announced that a gradual normalization process will be initiated in March. Weekend lockdowns will be lifted on a provincial basis depending on COVID infection numbers, and a plan to reopen cafes and restaurants will be announced in the days to come.
According to Erdogan, provinces will be categorized into low, medium, high, and very high risk based on infection and vaccination rates. The Health Ministry has begun publishing more detailed provincial case numbers as of February 15. It is this data that will guide the reopening of dining at restaurants and cafes, as well as schools, the officials said. The data could also trigger tighter restrictions in certain districts. Erdogan further stated that he believed March would be a month in which Turkey makes great advancements in terms of vaccination, and added that Ankara was making the necessary arrangements for the procurement of doses. Experts have stated that if the vaccination process continues at this speed, it will take up to 2 years to vaccinate 60 million people. Earlier this week, Health Minister Fahrettin Koca said that the country's Coronavirus Scientific Advisory Board advised the Council of Higher Education to tell universities to continue theoretical classes online, whereas to hold face-to-face instruction for applied trainings.
The Trade Ministry has filed a lawsuit demanding the dissolution of Anadolu Kültür, a nonprofit cultural institution founded by the jailed philanthropist Osman Kavala.
Stating that the company is carrying out operations without a profit purpose like associations and foundations, the ministry alleged that this was against public order or the field of operation of the business as per Article 210 of the Turkish Commercial Code. In response, Anadolu Kültür released a statement saying that the lawsuit was a continuation of the unlawfulness against Kavala. This is the first lawsuit filed on the grounds of operating in a similar way to associations and foundations in Turkey's history, the statement noted. The company said that all of its operations had been legal and transparent since its foundation in 2002, and the Financial Crimes Investigation Board and the ministry had not found any offenses regarding its operations. The Financial Crimes Investigation Board then requested the Trade Ministry to investigate whether Anadolu Kültür's activities could be considered as company operations, says the statement. After the inquiry, the ministry concluded that the company was founded for economic purposes but made most of its income through donations and grants by people and organizations from Turkey and abroad, according to Anadolu Kültür's statement.
This week, the Boğaziçi protests continue to be held, disregarding the heavy snow and the cold weather in Istanbul. This week's developments follow the controversial appointee of a new dean to Boğaziçi's new law department and the report released by Human Rights Watch on the ongoing protests.
Despite the cold weather and heavy snowfall in Istanbul over the past days, Boğaziçi University students and faculty continue to hold protests against the political appointment of Melih Bulu as the university rector. The Boğaziçi students also reiterated their demand for the release of 9 students who have been arrested during the course of the protests. In midst of the student protests at the university, President Erdogan had signed an executive order to open new academic departments of communications and law at Boğaziçi. The newly appointed dean for the new Department of Law was announced to be Professor Selami Kuran. However, it was revealed that Professor Kuran was disqualified by the European Court of Human Rights when he was interviewed by the Parliamentary Assembly of the European Council on the election of judges to the ECHR. On February 18, Human Rights Watch issued a statement on Boğaziçi University protests under the title of Turkey, Student Protesters at the Risk of Prosecution. They shared both a broadcast news report and a written article evaluating the ongoing protests from the very start. In the article, Human Rights Watch stated that students and faculty have been exercising their lawful right to peacefully express their opposition to the appointment. In accordance, they interviewed 18 students, including 4 who had been released from police custody, 4 lawyers, and 2 academics, analyzed images and legal documents, and monitored 4 student protests. In the statement, Human Rights Watch's Europe and Central Asia Director Hugh Williamson commented the following: Erdogan's appointment of an unelected rector to Boğaziçi University and the violent arrests of students who had peacefully protested the move encapsulates the government's disregard for basic human rights. Imposing an unelected presidential appointee rector on a university with no consultation demonstrates a lack of respect for academic freedom and the autonomy of universities in Turkey. Human Rights Watch also mentioned that the Turkish government officials have used anti-LGBTQI+ rhetoric to appeal to conservative outrage and to delegitimize the protests.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. See you next Friday at 9 p.m. Good night.